Well, welcome. And today we're going to be thinking about wheelchair using in and around our buildings. So John, if you wouldn't mind showing the first slide for us, that would be great. Excellent. Everybody see that? It's worth saying that it felt like the end of the world to become a part-time wheelchair user and to start being someone who did use a wheelchair in church. And quite often when we think about wheelchair users, we're thinking about other people, you know, what we can do for people or how we can support other people. But it's really important to just recognise at the beginning of this session that actually all sorts of people find themselves using wheelchairs for all sorts of reasons. And it may be that the person who we are removing barriers to admission actually are the ones that will bring gifts and be able to minister to you and others. So we need to kind of have in our minds that this isn't us being the benevolent ones helping those poor wheelchair users in, but that actually, you know, any of you could break your leg tomorrow and find yourself needing to carry on working as you do in your ministries and developing, and that there are many gifts to be shared that are currently wasted because people don't have that approach to access in the broadest sense beyond just the physical. And to be perfectly honest, when I found myself unable to keep being someone who stood up in order to fulfill my ministry, I really did think it was going to be the end of ministry for me and church. And I thought, well, I won't be able to go to most churches. So, you know, I may just really struggle to be part of the church in the future. And I'm delighted to say that that has not been the case. So I wanted to start off by saying that there's an awful lot of creativity required and possible. So I wanted to start off by saying that it's not just going to be all about ramps. That said, John, can you show us your next slide, please? Just pick mine up. Oh, Jordan's gone and come back again. Give me a moment. Okay, so I'm just going to audio describe what it is we're looking at. So we're looking at what looks like a construction of steps with a kind of smooth, zigzagged pathway through it. Does anybody want to hazard a guess at what this is called? Give me a wave if you and unmute yourself if you think you might know what this particular thing is called. I heard the word actually only recently, but I love it. It's called a stramp. Introducing the stramp. And this actually won awards for all sorts of reasons. It was done in Canada and has since been used by architects all over the world and recreated in various different settings. And I want us to just do a little bit of imagining ourselves maybe using this ramp or just exploring what we think it's trying to achieve. Now, because we're such a small group, if you've got, we'll just have a bit of an open conversation about this. Any thoughts initially on this? What do you think it's aiming to do? Feel free to just unmute yourselves and chip in.
Accessibility for everyone.
Right. So it's looking, it's aiming to provide level access.
And not to stigmatise wheelchair users, that they can use the same space as everybody else.
Indeed. How successful do you think this is as a piece of designed architecture? It's quite innovative, isn't it? If John can bring up our next slide, we're going to carry on that conversation. We're going to carry on that thinking. And actually, I was quite surprised at the impact of this item. So there we have somebody, my natty little graphic there. So we've got somebody in a wheelchair there. Now we can see somebody in situ, and although the proportion is only going to get worse, I can assure you, as people start joining in on this ramp. So we've got somebody at the top there. How do you think that is going for that person using the strump in that way? Are there any issues that you can see that might arise for that person if that's you? Imagine sitting in, either on that man's lap or in that spastic wheelchair.
The corners look a bit tight, but then I'm not used to negotiating the wheelchair, so maybe they're not as tight as they look.
Corners look a bit tight.
Looks a little steep.
Looks a bit steep. Yeah.
There's no barriers at the edges.
No, there aren't. So I think you're starting to imagine what it might feel like to be that man now, and it's like, oh, actually, that does look a little bit scary, I think, potentially, as a wheelchair user. But it's still doing a thing. It's better than the steps. What about, John, if you move us on to our next slide? How about now? There's various other people joining now. I'm going to audio describe very, very badly. Again, some very funky proportioned people. So the guy at the top is using double crutches. How do we think it is for him using that space? Quite a lot to negotiate, isn't there? Okay, a little bit further down, we have somebody using a cane, presumably for a visual impairment. Any issues that you spot there?
Wouldn't be able to see where the edges are.
No, suddenly looks a lot more precarious, doesn't it? Following the ramp, the strump down, now we have somebody using a dog, a guide dog. Any issues there? How's that looking?
I think the dog might be a bit confused.
It's not very clear, is it, where the edges are? There's a lady on her way up. She's about to run over the guide dog by the looks of it. What about for her? For those, actually, we have way more people accessing our churches or trying to access our churches that use walkers like these. How's the strump going to function now, do we think?
It doesn't really allow for anyone to come past, does it? Unless that's just a proportion, but yeah, again, and it's a bit, there's nothing to hold on to go around corners or as the line goes up. Or
Any other thoughts?
Not really any passing places.
Indeed. Yeah, I mean, that one, actually, if you think, if that's, I mean, I don't use a wheelie walker, but just picturing myself being there, it's very easy for one of those wheels to nip off one of the edges, and your whole stability is on its way down, just as precariously as the guy at the top there, trying to negotiate where the rampy bit ends and the steps begin. It's worth noting that at no point was anybody with mobility issues or any of these representative people consulted in the design of the strump. So it seemed like a really banging idea, didn't it? And actually, it's quite dangerous. There has been, this was built 20 years ago, but there are many reproductions of it. But it's a really excellent example, which I'm hoping that we've illustrated between us here, that it's always a good idea to ask somebody who experiences the barrier that you're seeking to remove. I'm going to say that again because it really matters on whatever barrier we're looking at. Wheelchair users, crutches, sighted dogs, and the wheelie walkers. It's always a good idea to get someone who experiences the barrier that you're seeking to remove to give you their thoughts, because there's a good chance that they will have already worked out what might be most helpful. So having said it's not all about ramps, we are just going to have a little look. John, if you wouldn't mind moving us on to the rampy slide. This is something that we have much more familiar with, I'm sure. How many of you in your churches have got something like this? in your that's access into your churches or around bits of your churches. Shirley, you have?
Yeah, just very newly installed, not in our main church, but in one of the other churches now, Benefice. In actual fact, I had put it out yesterday for the first time. So
how was that?
Bouncy in the middle when we first put it up.
Yeah.
We put it up, and then the top end has got like a lip that, to start with, it overshot the top of the step. So we had to move it back down so that it sits level on the top step. But then it was actually quite bouncy, and in the end they managed to find a piece of wood to support it in the middle, because we didn't think people would be happy going up it. We've got a young person in an assisted wheelchair whose mum brings them in, and we have got people on walkers. Neither of them were there yesterday, the first time it was out. But we did. We were up and back and forwards, up and down it with this piece of wood, chopping it up in the middle. So I think it needs something underneath it really to make it feel stable and steady.
Anybody else got something like this that they bring in and out? These are temporary ramps.
Yeah, we've got something similar. It's not quite the same as that, and we find that it makes for quite a steep slope, which we've got one person who is very reluctant to use it, who uses an assisted wheelchair, motorized, if that's correct terminology, and she actually said she feels fearful of falling out of her seat. And isn't prepared to use it.
Yeah, Karen, that is a really common story, and many people are using the portable ramps for understandable reasons, because getting something permanent in place is tricky, especially if you've got an old building and limited funds. It's worth hearing that bit of feedback from Karen, the person who uses the one in your church, that the wheelchair user with a power assisted wheelchair doesn't want to use it. As someone who uses a wheelchair, I can really relate to how fearful it is if the gradient isn't right. Shirley, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, the steps to the church I was at yesterday aren't as wide as these steps on these photographs. So they're just the width of the double doors of the church. Okay, so the ramp. Traditionally they only open one door into the church, so the ramp was filling up that space. And I said to them, I don't think you can do this. I think you need to open the other door so that people have got the option of the ramp or the steps, because especially when it was unsupported in the middle, it felt quite bouncy. So they did in the end open the door that's rarely opened, so people could walk in.
Well, it's really helpful, Shirley, that you're here having had recent experience, because how heavy is it? How difficult is it for you to get in and out of place?
Yeah, it was lifted out before I got there, and it had been lifted out single-handedly by the lady that was covering, so I presume it's not that heavy, but it did take three of us to kind of adjust it to get it in the right position once it was out there. So maybe we haven't designed stramps, but I think what we're hearing amongst ourselves in our own experience is that these types of ramps that many of us are thinking, okay, yeah, we need ramp access. Oh yeah, let's look on Google, let's buy one and just pop it there, and that hopefully will solve the problem. But actually it's a bit more complicated than that, and that sometimes we might have been wasting our money because people may find that they don't want to use it because it's a bit scary. There's a number of reasons that it might be pretty much unusable and not do, like the stramp, not really do the thing other than say that you've tried. It'd be much better for you to know where to put your energy and your efforts. And there are a couple of things to really hold on to when thinking about getting temporary ramps. The first one has already been mentioned, the gradient. There's a calculation, there's a ratio that is easily found. But if we're looking at this particular
example here, the one with the wheelchair on, I don't have handles on my wheelchair, but even if I did, that looks like I couldn't self-propel. That would be something I would need dragging backwards up that. So just pop yourself in, you know, imagine that's you for a moment. That can feel, that's a barrier to coming into church. That's quite embarrassing. So I actively avoid using those things, which might mean actively avoiding not or feeling unable to go and join in with something. The other thing to note is that there's nothing really much to stop your chair falling off the ramp, whichever way, whether you're going up or down at whatever gradient. I share a horrible experience of going to Westminster Abbey and for a huge thing that they were having that I was part of, and they've got something very similar to the one with the chair there, and it was really steep. I did have help, but I did need an awful lot of push from someone else. And then coming back down again, my chair fell off the side, and I fell with it. And so there is a real issue in terms of how usable is this. And Shirley, it's helpful that you pulled yours, or that you've talked about somebody had single-handedly got that out. We do accidentally create real issues for people if we are having to drag these things in and out of place. Now, I accept they may be better than nothing, but I would really encourage you to just, you know, take something from these pictures and look again at what you have, because there are much better designed ones. There are calculations if you are going to be trying to put ramp access in, which we all should be, in order to comply with the Equality Act, but mainly because as Christians we want people to know that they can get in and join in, and that, you know, if we all broke our legs tomorrow, we wouldn't be without our church fellowship. And so we do need to be looking at finding ways in, but it's always worth getting. And I return to the Stramp example. Involve the people who experience the barrier that you are trying to remove. There's an awful lot of shared learning. There's guidelines on the best kinds, and that there are more portable, light ones that will be easier than the ones that you might be dragging around and having to put wood underneath. But do your homework before you spend any money on this. And if you've got a ramp that really doesn't work very well and you're getting feedback, I would really encourage you to start looking at alternatives. And just taking on board that actually it feels quite frightening. I mean, I think these pictures illustrate quite well that it will be a little bit on the scary side to be using these. And so maybe, like the Stramp, a good effort, but not really solving the problem that you were setting out to solve, and may not be making the church as accessible as you would hope. So having said it's not all about ramps, we're going to talk about some other things. John, if you wouldn't mind moving us on to the next slide, please. Excellent. Now, in this graphic, there's quite a lot of information, but just to spend a moment to go through that with you. I wanted to start off with a super top tip about whatever it is that you offer and whatever it is that you do in terms of how church works, that signage is your cheapest high impact thing to change. So you'll see in this slide that you have a disabled parking badge or a sign, but that particular signage is really, really well understood. So if you are a church that's got level access one way around the church and not another, put a sign to say level access with an arrow, because actually when you turn up somewhere as a wheelchair user and you don't know which way you might need to go, you might be missing a whole access route that you would only know if you knew. And generally, if you're struggling with mobility, you're not going to be doing a lap of the building to find out the best route in. Signage is a really, really important part of you signposting what you have. So if you've got a level access, do share it. Yes, Shirley.
Just a funny story. I've lived here in this village for 46 years, and we Remembrance Sunday we swap services venues with the Methodist chapel, so we take turns each year. And we were discussing it this year. And one of our ladies who uses a walker or a motorised scooter was in on the discussion. And I said, how will you get in if we have it at the Methodist Chapel this year? And she said, well, there's a side door with level access. And for 46 years, and going to that chapel occasionally for funerals and remembrance services, I've never known that existed.
Well, that's a really brilliant. Oh, I'm so glad you came, Shirley. You've got so many good experiences that are not, none of this is hypothetical, is it? We're all dealing with this every time we use buildings. I know, and anytime there's a funeral or a wedding, this isn't, we don't need access because we haven't got anyone who uses a wheelchair. Well, actually, the Church of England is everyone's church, isn't it? So, it's really worth looking around your building and thinking, are we using the best entrance here? What if we all just come through that way? Then you haven't got that. You have to go around the back and buy the bins or whatever it is. But signage is really critical. So imagine, what, 47 years did you say, Shirley?
Yeah, 47 this month, yeah. And I never knew it was that access was there.
If you've got the access, shout about it, because people will assume you probably haven't, especially with our older buildings. We've got some more in these images here. You've got some reserved seating. That's, again, something which is really helpful. One slight pet peeve for many disabled people, many wheelchair users, is that you don't have a choice of where to be. And if you do have a choice, you've got the front or the back. Now, we're all probably Anglicans here, aren't we? So nobody's going to want to sit at the front, are they? So, and the worst of all is, of course, in the aisle. But those are the obvious spaces that people are navigated to. So when thinking about signage, think about, where would I like to choose to sit in this building and where can I? So I wonder, have any of you got a wheelchair in your church that you have as an emergency safety thing? Lisa, you have. Karen, you have. Did you say? Karen, have you ever had a go in it?
No.
Would you?
No, I've not. I've got one as well that I sometimes use for my mum as well. So it's something I could try out to see what it's like.
Do you know, it will teach you so much about how the building that you've got and how you do things works and doesn't work. It will also help you to work out where signage should be put for priority spacing. So I know that we don't all have complete flexibility in our buildings. I'm vicar of a church with fixed pews in many different places, but we have quite easily been given consent by an archdeacon's license, didn't even need a faculty, to remove a pew from within the body of the church, so that disabled people can just go into that space, and they're not at the back, they're not at the front, they're in the middle, which actually is pretty much where we'd all quite like to sit, isn't it? So Karen, and anybody else here who's got access to a wheelchair, can I encourage you, even just if it feels silly, perhaps even get the PCC to have a little play before or after or as part of a meeting, navigating your building, and use the wheels that you've got, because you will learn, every single building is different, and you will learn way more than I can teach you about what does and doesn't work. But you might also identify things about your building that you, well, like Shirley, that you hadn't noticed before, that you could use creatively. So it really isn't all about, well, once you've got that ramp in there, then everything's fine. You might be able to tweak quite a lot of things. And I would definitely encourage you to think about either shortening a pew or two so that people can sit within the body of the congregation, or removing a pew from within the middle if you've got pews. If you've got chairs, this is easy peasy. And giving people a choice of where to sit, and actually signing priority seating for those with wheelchairs and or pushchairs. That's how we sign it. And that signage is, well, you can laminate your own for free, can't you? The picture in the middle there is another really practical thing that will cost you nothing at all. If you're sitting down and everybody else is standing around, it can be quite hard to join in. So if you're going to have a chat with someone who is sitting down, it's good if you can be sitting down next to them or in front of them, so that you're actually able to communicate on an equal footing. So that's a fairly straightforward thing to do. Now, I don't know how your knees are, but having, a chair that you can pull to hand to sit down next to somebody, it feels so much more comfortable for somebody just to sit down next to me and drag up a chair next to me and have a conversation with me, than not knowing whether to crouch or stand over me or where to stand. And that's a pretty universal experience. You do always feel a little bit like furniture that's in the way. So actually just sitting alongside people, and let's be honest, our faith is one of shared solidarity and pilgrimage. So find a way to communicate face to face, which isn't as difficult as it sometimes can feel. And it's not patronizing to do that. It's actually just more effective communication. In the bottom corner there, we've got some paving slabs. Just any kind of lumps and bumps make it hard to get around. Now, we know that when we're thinking about people tripping over, we've got plenty of frail elderly people who access our buildings and join in with what we do. But all surfaces are not equal for wheelchair users. And again, I would encourage you to see if you can have a go in a wheelchair and trundle yourself from the car park, down the path, into the building and around the building. And every tiny little thing, so that's quite a pronounced little trip hazard there, but small things actually feel quite, there's no suspension on most wheelchairs. So you're sort of hitting those things with something hard that you're sitting on. So it's really worth just checking the kind of pathways and checking that they are as smooth and unobstructed as possible. But again, you'll learn all about where those lumps and bumps are and where perhaps the gaps could be made wider if you sit in a wheelchair and trundle yourself around. It's actually quite fun to do, but you do learn an awful lot. So wherever you can clear floor space, then do that. And it won't be just wheelchair users that benefit from that. Now, what on earth is that picture of men? And they do appear to be mostly men on this slide. Well, I'm going to again share experience that if you are either at the back or even in the body of the congregation, and then of course we say let's stand to sing, and if we stand for the Eucharistic prayer, all the person in a wheelchair is seeing, and I'm going to be polite and say it's bottoms. And actually that is quite most of our churches and a lot of Anglican worship includes the visual space, doesn't it? And actually, there's a reason why we do things up at the front or create or have the colours and the altar and the windows and the shared movement. So in this little note about the do's, which is part of the Welcoming Church resource pack that you probably all got by now if you signed up to the Enabling All Awards, it says if someone is blocking a wheelchair user's view, politely ask them to sit down. I'm not shy, but I find that difficult to do. So it's something that you sort of have to alert your sides people to, or you create spaces where actually there's already a line of sight, which is how we choose to do it at St Andrews. So if somebody is sitting their wheelchair in amongst a particular space, try and make sure that the space in front of them and the view to the altar particularly is unobstructed. Because you do feel like a ninny if you are sitting and then everybody gets up around you and obviously instead of seeing the altar and whatever's going on up there, you do just see bottoms. So again, it's one of those tips that is worth knowing, and you can design it out by the way you lay out your space. But of course, if your sides people are able to say, oh, would you mind either moving to the sides or perhaps sitting down so that people can see. Jordan keeps dropping out and coming back in, if you wouldn't mind admitting him. Thank you. Okay, on to our next and almost at the end slide. These are the don'ts. There we are. They're fairly self-explanatory. Now, don't push me, you'll regret it. I couldn't quite find the right image for this. But I will tell you another brief example of my own. So in the early days of being a curate, I was a speaker at an event, the Churches Together, the World Women's Day of Prayer, and I went early to set up. And we were just getting on with it. There was quite a lot of people there. And I was told, somebody from behind me sort of took hold of the back of my chair and said, "Where shall I put you, dear?" And I thought she was joking. And I was like, and the vicar was all, "Oh, no, she's the speaker." And she went, "Oh, isn't she naughty? Shall I put you on the left or the right?" I was really mortified for her. She was obviously totally mortified. But you would be there's a reason I don't have handles on my wheelchair, because they're ergonomically designed for the pusher. So wheelchair users will tell you that it's really common for people to just move you out the way a little bit. Just, I'm coming past, so I'll just move you. It would feel it feels as alien as if someone's just picked up the chair you're sitting on, or perhaps even given you a fireman's lift and popped you in another part of the building. It's really, really kind of definitely poor etiquette to take hold of somebody and move them. And most people don't do that with any sense of malice or condescension, but it's really, really tempting. So just make sure you don't do those things. And actually, sighted people are discouraged from doing that. I go around doing site visits quite often with people, and recently at a site visit, somebody with one of those wheelie walkers was telling me about how they use it to get to their seat, as many do, and put it in the aisle next to them, but that a sighted person or warden finds it necessary to helpfully tidy it up out the way and pop it up out the way at the back. That's that person's access in and out of her seating. And so we really mustn't be moving other people's equipment, because it is like someone putting your shoes off for you, or suddenly you lose your ability to independently navigate the space. So try not to be too tidy, because it is very tempting, unless something is a real obstruction, in which case it's a negotiation about, I wonder where we might be able to find a suitable space for you and your bit of equipment. That should be a conversation, and it's quite common to be experienced, because we do like to keep things nice and tidy, don't we? There was a little countdown clock on this slide, for a number of obvious reasons. I mean, the point says don't rush people. I would also say that the countdown clock is something that people who struggle with standing, and not all wheelchair users can't stand. I can stand, depending on how my pain is, and my wheelchair is one of the tools I use. If there are 47 verses in a hymn, and let's be honest, sometimes there is, isn't there? Then you really are counting down how many verses before you can sit back down again. And you're actually not really taking part in the worship. So we have a bit of a rule at St Andrews where we go with a 3-verse maximum, because actually you can have more choice of what you sing. People who can stand usually might like to, but they really might, by the time you get into verse 3 or 4, people are no longer, a lot of people are thinking about how much their back's hurting, or how they need to be sitting back down. And standing is a thing that feels quite important to people. So just be aware that for a number of people, and every time they're standing up, there is that countdown happening. I always have a bit of a mental egg timer in my head, and I'm looking around and seeing other white knuckles, people holding on to the backs of pews, really, really wishing we hadn't gone for the full 7 verses. So it's just a bit of a top tip there if you're involved in creating services. Heavy doors, that's a bit of a given. If you've got doors of any kind that aren't self-opening and closing, allocate a steward to do by them. Because I've perfected a move I like to call the joust. So if you're self-propelling, your hands are full. But if you're having to push a door, you're going to have to stick your leg out in order to do that, push it yourself. And then quite often find yourself trapped in it. It's much easier, and it's just really, really good hospitality to have somebody by a door. Any doors that are coming in and out, just have somebody standing there or sitting there that can manage the door. It's a very easy and free thing to do that will make quite a difference in terms of people's experience. Last but not least, we have the next slide, John. This is our last one. Holy Communion. Most of us are sharing in Holy Communion, Eucharist weekly in our churches. And I just wanted you to have a little think about how you share communion. In the images on the screen, you've got what somebody referred to as the ice cream queue the other day. I like to call this one cathedral style. That's how we do it in St Andrews. And it means we're not clambering up to the high altar and kneeling. Some people kneeling is really, really important. So it's again one of those experiences that's worth getting a range of views on. Quite often you'll only hear a sort of disgruntled minority about what and how we must receive. But there's something really important about being able to all receive in the same way, or at least be given the opportunity to receive in the same way. And that's where the cathedral style, where people come forward and receive rather than kneeling, it tends to be much more inclusive, because disabled people are just within the flow of the journey to receive. And that's something which works really well where we are. And if you think that there are people who might struggle to review that, it's just worth, well, that's where I think, when we go to the cathedral, it doesn't feel less holy to not kneel. And so if the Eucharist is presided up perhaps at a high altar and then can be brought down onto the level, that really takes away the access issues, the struggles that many people, I was dreading changing it in my church when this me as the new vicar arrived. I thought people would be really upset of no longer going up to the high altar, but were receiving on the level. And by far and away, the most feedback we got was, oh, thank goodness, that was getting harder and harder. And then you need people to help people clamber up and clamber back down again. And it just enables more people to relax if you're able to have that conversation and think through how you can use your space where everybody's able to receive in the same way. Of course, we always offer to take communion to where people are, but it's worth, like back at the Stramp, consulting people in the design of how you do things, rather than designing it in a particular way and then having to undo something for particular people. It's generally easier to do things that way. And it's worth thinking, perhaps, maybe ask your vicar, what would happen if he or she broke their leg tomorrow? How would you be able to share in the Eucharist? Would you say, oh yeah, well, because you've got a broken leg and you can't stand up as normal, then come back in 3 months when you can walk again? That's not really how it would happen. So just imagine how that feels for other people and how that might be practical to you can work your way around these things usually if you design them slightly differently with a bit of creativity. And as I say, ironically, cathedrals are quite often really accessible to receive communion because everybody receives it in the same way. So it's worth something to review together.